Hey everybody, good afternoon. This is Travis Gilbert, Educator and Collections Coordinator at the Old Baldy Foundation. We're bringing you another edition of Touring with Travis this afternoon. It is cold, it is windy, and there are lots of rain showers, although the rain has let up for just a few minutes here. So we're kind of doing something that's a little inside today because of the conditions here at Bald Head Island. We hope you folks are staying positive and that y'all are healthy out there. We'd love to hear from you during this live broadcast. Let us know where you're listening from and your connection to Bald Head Island. And as always, if you have something that you'd like us to answer, or if you'd like us to elaborate on something, give us a shout out there in those comments. Well, behind me here is the oil house for Old Baldy Lighthouse. And the oil house was completed in 1905. That's a date based on the records in the lighthouse official reports. The oil house was constructed during an era when the United States Lighthouse Service was switching from whale oil and other plant-based and lard-based oils as fuel for the lighthouse's lanterns into a kerosene-based fuel. They often called kerosene mineral oil. Mineral oil. That's how they knew it. Well, as you can imagine, kerosene is highly flammable. It's highly combustible. When you compare it to whale oil or canola oil or lard, which is slightly less combustible. So nobody wanted to store all these barrels of kerosene in the base of the lighthouses or in the keepers' cottages, because lighthouses are nothing but giant lightning rods, folks. They get hit by lightning all the time. If this camera is a little bit better, I could show you some char marks up at the top of Old Baldy. So nobody wanted to store all these barrels of kerosene in the bases of the lighthouses. That'd be a pretty big rocket. So beginning in about the 1880s throughout the early 20th century, the Lighthouse Service began constructing brick insulated oil houses on their lighthouse reservations in order to properly and safely store all these barrels of kerosene that were being delivered to the lighthouse reservations on ships called lighthouse tenders. And fortunately, we have ours here at Old Baldy Lighthouse. All right, again, built in 1905. Got Old Baldy up there. There she is peeking out. And you can see a lovely storm cloud coming my way. So let us venture inside Old Baldy's oil house. In March, we were opening this up for interpretation first time. And there is the finished product. We'll discuss that in a minute. So we are very proud to have this interpreted, have it open to the public. Was open for about 2 weeks until we unfortunately had to close because of the pandemic. But we're looking forward to folks being able to enjoy this space when we get to reopen, when it is safe and proper to do so. So you can see the oil house here. I'm going to shut this door so the wind. You can see it's brick and insulated. There was a new roof placed in up here for preservation purposes, but it's just a big empty room and where kerosene would have been stored inside this oil house. Now the oil house here at Old Baldy is separated by a wall. Behind this panel, there is an equally large space behind that. So the the oil house is broken up into 2 rooms. I'm in one room. Behind that wall is another room roughly the same size. And that is because oil or kerosene was stored in this building for 2 sets of lighthouses. In this room, the lighthouse, the oil for Old Baldy out there was stored. Behind that wall in the other building, the oil for all the beacons and the buoys and the range lights in the Cape Fear River was stored. So this oil house had dual purposes: to store the kerosene illuminating Old Baldy and then to store the kerosene illuminating the buoys in the Cape Fear River. Now, in this panel, I was tasked with coming up with something that involved the Generator Society. Originally, when this room was going to be interpreted a few years back, they were going to create an exhibit about the Generator Society. And that was what we had decided here at the Old Baldy Foundation, that we wanted to play or continue that legacy with something to do with generate. So we came up with thinking about what different types of generations, play on words if you will, what types of powers were generated in the history of Bald Head Island. And you can see the generate is a verb, it's to create. So what we came up with was central to the history of Bald Head Island are the stories of those who generated power. The power of sail, the power of light, and the power of community. 3 different types of powers that were generated throughout history here on Bald Head Island. So let's explore that idea here in this dry and somewhat warm room on this terrible day. So sail power was generated. So sails brought ships to the Cape Fear River in this era of sail. So the Cape Fear River, or Island, it's situated on a vast oceanic highway, if you we have this warm water flowing right past Bald Head Island and the rest of North Carolina's coastline. That warm water originates in the Caribbean, and it flows directly up the eastern seaboard, past Bald Head Island, along North Carolina's coastline. And when it reaches Cape Hatteras, it makes a clockwise or slightly right turn, takes itself out of Europe. And beginning in the age of exploration, when the French and the English and the Dutch and certainly the Spanish were exploring the Caribbean and the North American coastline, these sailors learned of this stream or this current. Today we call it the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream was just like a highway. Like if you're a North Carolinian, Route 40, Route 81. This was a highway for sailors in the age of sail, during the age of exploration, up until, we start inventing the airplane, if you will. And Bald Head Island is sandwiched right along that vast oceanic highway. So as mariners employed these currents in the Gulf Stream to propel their journeys from the Caribbean back to Europe, back to home, they eventually passed Bald Head Island. And that attracted so many different explorers, so many different early colonists and settlers in North America to find Bald Head Island, to find the lower Cape Fear River. Some attempted to settle along the banks of the Cape Fear. Others merely passed by and noted Bald Head Island and the Cape Fear River's existence. But Bald Head Island played an important role in the... There we go, we're back. Sorry, the Wi-Fi in these brick walls is not very conductive. But long story short, the Bald Head Island was sandwiched in this oceanic highway, and that's why so many colonizers and explorers noted Bald Head Island in the 1660s and 1700s, even back to the 1500s. We're not sure. We have a picture of Verrazzano here, Giovanni da Verrazzano. He was from Florence, he was from Italy. He sailed on behalf of the French, and we think that he landed in North America for the first time somewhere along Long Bay, which Long Bay goes from Cape Fear here on Bald Head Island in a southern direction down towards Cape Remain in South Carolina. So you think he would have landed somewhere along the shores of Oak Island or Sunset Beach, Holden Beach, Myrtle Beach, maybe the Waccamaw Neck down near modern Georgetown, South Carolina. So once the settlers found the Cape Fear River, found Bald Head Island, and began permanently settling here, they were attracted to this land because of naval stores. And you see some men here harvesting naval stores. Naval stores are any kinds of materials that are used to build and maintain a ship. Think of tar and turpentine, rosin, pitch. Some of these materials are used to seal the hull of ships, to make them watertight. Others of these materials, these naval stores, are used to coat ropes and masts to make them last longer. Again, naval stores, anything that is derived from Carolina longleaf pine, used to maintain and to build ships in this great era of sailing. And North Carolina, specifically southeastern North Carolina, had one of the largest reservoirs for naval stores in the world. This was the area that you came to harvest naval supplies, and that was necessary to have a large navy, to have a large merchant fleet. You needed naval stores to maintain your ships. So when we were colonies under the guise of Great Britain, this great naval power, they needed southeastern North Carolina's naval stores to maintain their naval supremacy. And after we declared our independence and won the American Revolution, so much of our nation's wealth came from shipping. And of course, these ships needed the naval stores just as the British needed the naval stores, and they found an abundant supply in southeastern North Carolina. So many parts of Brunswick, Robeson, Columbus, Duplin counties, anything west and upriver of the Cape Fear, that's where these naval stores were harvested. And you see these men here harvesting the naval stores from this Carolina longleaf pine there. And it is because of these naval stores and the abundant supply of those longleaf pines in southeastern North Carolina that the port of Wilmington grew into North Carolina's largest city from about 1840 to the 1920 census. And you can see there barrels of tar or turpentine, I'm not sure which of it is, but they're on modern-day Eagles Island, and you can see the downtown Wilmington waterfront across the Cape Fear River from this perspective, where all these naval stores are being lined up on a wharf in order to reach wherever the merchant needed them, whether it was a New England merchantmen or maybe up in Norfolk, where there are lots of shipyards, down in Charleston. They're waiting to be spread out across the world, a world which desperately needed these naval stores to maintain their wealth on the high seas. Curious side note, when the Confederates took over Old Baldy Lighthouse at the beginning of the Civil War, they packed up Old Baldy's third-order Fresnel lens, and they took it to the Customs House in downtown Wilmington. And that is the Customs House there, built around 1841, I believe. And that is where Old Baldy's third-order Fresnel lens was stored during the Civil War until the Union captured Wilmington in February of 1865, found the Fresnel lens in that Customs House, and then took it back to Staten Island, where the Lighthouse Services Depot was. That Customs House is no longer. It is now where the Alton Lennon Federal Courthouse is along the waterfront in downtown Wilmington. This is the Water Street landing there. Right? So that the power of sail to create by a vital or natural process. A second power that was generated on Bald Head Island is the power of light. So as these ports like Wilmington are growing in the lower Cape Fear, these mariners coming to pick up all those naval supplies or naval stores along the waterfront in downtown Wilmington, they needed navigational aids in order to help find their way into the port of Wilmington. And of course, the second navigational aid in the Cape Fear River is Old Baldy Lighthouse out there. And Old Baldy needs a fuel in order to create her flame as a navigational aid. And that was first created with whale oil. It was fueled by whale oil. And there were vast whaling fleets. There were some in North Carolina, many up in Massachusetts and New England. These whaling fleets would go out and kill the spermaceti whale that produced the oil. It was an organ in the whale's head there that produced this early fuel for lighthouses. And as I was saying in the introduction here, whale oil became increasingly expensive as the 19th century went on because we kept killing off so many of the whales. The whales became endangered, they became harder to hunt, which skyrocketed the price of whale oil. So in the mid to late 19th century, the Lighthouse Service kind of played around with various other fuels. They used lard, they used canola oil, which is a vegetable oil, believe it or not. And finally, by the late 19th century, they arrived at what they called mineral oil that we know today as kerosene. And kerosene being way more combustible or highly combustible compared to the whale oil and other vegetables and lards, they needed to create this brick-insulated oil house to properly and safely store all that kerosene that was being delivered here to Old Baldy Lighthouse to fuel her flame in the later part of her years. Old Baldy was never electrified. Now, in 1908 at Cape Fear Light Station, which is the lighthouse depicted here, the lighthouse out at the modern campus of the Bald Head Island Conservancy, she began just as Old Baldy, fueled by kerosene. The only difference is she began, in 1908, her kerosene was vaporized by ignition. So it looked like a giant Bunsen burner at the top of Cape Fear Lighthouse. You can think of Bunsen burner from chemistry class. That's exactly what it looked like atop Cape Fear Light Station. And that giant Bunsen burner after the year 1908 was placed again in this first order Fresnel lens. We were talking about how Old Baldy Lighthouse had a third order lens before the American Civil War. That was placed in that customs house we just discussed. After the American Civil War, they her and they give her a fourth order Fresnel lens in the year 1880 when she resumes operations. Well, in 1903, when Cape Fear Light Station is placed, they give her a first order Fresnel lens. It's the largest of them all. You can think of the word order as size. The first order or size being the largest of the Fresnel lenses, and that descends to a sixth order or sixth size Fresnel lens, which is the smallest of them all. So you think Old Baldy is given a third order lens and then later a fourth order lens. Right there in the middle of the spectrum, Cape Fear Light Station receives a first order Fresnel lens in her watch room or her lantern room. It is the largest of them all. It is so powerful it casts a light 18.5 miles to sea, and it weighs 6,000 pounds. Again, first fueled by kerosene, and then around the year 1939, she is electrified with a 500-watt light bulb in the middle of that Fresnel lens. A 500-watt light bulb. And of course, in 1958, she is decommissioned by the United States Lighthouse Service or establishment, and she is blown up with dynamite, replaced with Oak Island Lighthouse. You can see Oak Island's lantern room being placed on top there in this historic photograph. Oak Island was always electrified. She was the brightest lighthouse in the United States when first lit in 1958. And she was the second brightest lighthouse in the world when she was lit in 1958. Right here in our backyard in the Lower Cape Fear. What a treasure. So I like to say that the three different lighthouses around here really help depict or show us the different stages or eras of lighthouse fuels. All right, we have Old Baldy, who began operations with whale oil and concluded operations with kerosene. She was never electrified. And then we have Cape Fear Light Station, who began operations with kerosene as her fuel, and 1939 electrified. And then we have Oak Island Lighthouse, who was never fueled by kerosene and began operations in 1958 with electricity. 3 lighthouses depicting 3 different phases of lighthouse fuel, right? Now, the last thing that's going to be generated here in Bald Head Island is community, a sense of community. And the first community on Bald Head Island was a community of lighthouse or federal employees. I would say lighthouse employees, and I had to correct myself there, is because not just the lighthouse service had federal employees out here on Bald Head Island. We also had federal employees that work for the United States Life-Saving Service, which is a precursor to the Coast Guard. The Life-Saving Service operated on Bald Head Island at least seasonally from 1882 until 1915. And then in 1915, Congress consolidated the United States Life-Saving Service with the United States Revenue Cutter Service to create the modern Coast Guard as we know it today. And the Coast Guard operated until the 1930s, when that station was deactivated on Bald Head Island, only to be reactivated for a short time during World War II. That they decorated at the lighthouse station. Halloweens were spent square dancing. One of the assistant lighthouse keepers at Cape Fear Light Station lived with his mother at the lighthouse reservation, and his mother served as a teacher. There was a one-room. There we go. We're back. There was a one-room schoolhouse constructed on Bald Head Island during the early 20th century. So quite a sense of community out here on Bald Head Island. And that modern sense of community is not established until the 1970s, when the Generator Society comes here to Bald Head Island. These folks, these are 17 homes constructed by eventually 19 families that are officially known as the Generator Society. And they lived out here in early beach houses powered by gas-powered generators. And you can see the Wester's generator house here, not far from Royal James. We visited that last week at the lighthouse. Or we visited last week during one of these virtual programs. So it was in 1983 that George Mitchell, an energy entrepreneur from Texas, purchased Bald Head Island and became the last and final developer to own this island. He established Bald Head Island Limited, LLC, in 1983 when he bought this island, and many of the amenities that we know today were created by his development, Bald Head Island Limited, LLC. It was 2 years after George Mitchell buys this island that the village of Bald Head Island, the municipality, is incorporated. Right out here in the lighthouse grounds was where the first village council was sworn in. And that is the community that facilitates much of Bald Head Island today. The roads and the trash and the zoning laws, most of that originates through village council, of course, who are being advised and also being assisted by the Bald Head Island Association, which derived from the 1970s as well. Thad Wester was the first president of the Bald Head Island Association, and that's the gentleman whose generator house is depicted on this panel. So the community that we know today here on Bald Head Island, the community of about 150 to 200 permanent residents that swells into the thousands during the summer vacation seasons, it gets its origins from a core group of federal employees that created a sense of community on this island while they were employed in the lighthouse service or the life-saving service, bringing their families out here. They were the origins. The Generator Society was in the 1970s, where the growth of the community occurred into what we know today, thanks to the efforts of George Mitchell and the village of Bald Head Island. So 3 different types of generations, 3 different powers generated on Bald Island: the power of sail, the power of light, and the power of community. Instrumental and central to the history of Bald Island. And we're looking forward to inviting you all back to Bald Island when this all clears up, so you can see this panel for yourself and see this wonderful room. I'll go out into the elements here and give you an idea of this brick brick oil house. And it sits just to the base of Old Baldy Lighthouse. So thank you for joining us this afternoon during not a very nice, pleasant day. It's actually getting a little better outside, but we had to come up with a plan B because we knew that it might not be the best to be out touring all around. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow. It's supposed to be a beautiful day with a much more traditional episode of Touring with Travis. I promise we'll take you out into the field and show you a beautiful part of Bald Island and discuss its history. You all stay healthy and you stay positive out there during these crazy and distressing times. As always, thank you to our essential employees, all our healthcare workers out there on the front lines, and everybody else that's doing their part to keep our society functioning while the rest of us socially distance to stem and quell this curve so we can get things back to normal. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock for an episode of Quarantine Collections and what is promising to be a much better and beautiful day here on Bald Island. Take care, everybody, and have a great afternoon and evening.